Welcome to another installment of the Android Developer Relations Office Hours. I'm Sparky, and I'm also joined by my colleagues Nick and Peter in the London office. And we are here to discuss any and all issues related to Android development. So let's start by welcoming the people on the air and ask, do you have any questions for us today?
Hey Sparky, I've got one for you.
Okay.
I've been using loaders, and the cursor loader seems to be orientated towards using a content provider. Is there any reason that people should focus on using a content provider, or is using direct queries to the database as a backing for a loader considered okay as well?
That depends what you ask. There's actually divided opinions inside of DevRel. I would say if it works, go for it. If you think it's going to make your life a lot easier to do direct database access in your loader, go ahead. But I think all the samples that you find are probably going to be oriented around doing the content provider route. And apart from sort of a certain amount of boilerplate code that you have to write, I don't see a really compelling reason not to go that way.
Cool, thanks.
I've got a question next.
What's up?
To do a two-way slider.
The two-way slider. I see nothing in the documentation about that. I noticed that there's basically only two flags. There's like orientation horizontal and orientation vertical. I didn't see anything about left to right or right to left. So I would say, play around with it and see if you can figure anything out. Go get the Android OS platform source code off of the internet. See how it's implemented, and let us know what you find. Thanks.
I'll give it a go. So you cannot say it only goes left to right, right? There's no way to switch the thing to go right to left.
I haven't messed around with these sliders myself. All I can say is when I looked in the documentation, I didn't see anything at all about controlling which direction it went other than horizontal versus vertical.
Because we want to implement it like, to use to set a minimum and a maximum option, and we want the user to be able to control where to place it on a two-way slider, because that's the way they want to do it.
I suppose there's nothing stopping you from implementing your own custom control. You can do something interesting with the view pager, perhaps, or a dialogue. Implement make a gesture detector and just display a dialogue on a gesture or something like that. There's things you can do.
Yeah. I'll go and look at it, because I tried Google, and Google didn't really help a lot of this topic.
I would certainly be the first to tell you not to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to.
Okay. Then that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Oh.
I've got one for Peter, who's busy typing away there. Has he seen any common feature requests or things from the guys out in Africa, such as requests to limit the amount of data that's pulled down, given some of the networks there aren't that hot?
Nick, are you guys muted? Is Peter talking?
Can you hear me?
We can barely hear you, Peter. Well, while we're straightening that out, we've also just been joined by Noam. Hi, how are you? Do you have a question for us, Noam? Do you want to ask a question about Android? Not hearing you. Are you muted? No, your microphone's active.
I think we're back. I think we dropped. Anyone is full. Can you hear us?
Peter, I heard you that time.
Okay, good. Right. So what I was saying about Sub-Saharan Africa generally, the questions about bandwidth aren't in terms of limiting data on
in the Android or the application side. A lot of that is obviously dependent on what people are trying to do over the internet. For example, I'm looking at Stack Overflow stuff, and they use gzip to compress their streams, their API. Most of the questions that I get are, what is Google doing to improve the situation, and how soon can we get better devices? Those are the kind of questions I get from Sub-Saharan Africa. They don't generally tend to ask that we should do anything about limiting the data. I think that's generally an infrastructure issue. Google's already doing a lot in terms of its infrastructure on the access side to optimize these things. So that's probably the way we're going to look at helping the situation.
Cool.
So?
Yep, thanks.
Right. So Noam, welcome to the show. Would you like to ask a question about Android development? Not yet.
Hello, if you want to speak, I think you're muted. If you can't talk, if you're in a noisy environment, feel free to ask your question in the chat.
Well, why don't we then move on and take a question from the moderator. We still have a few left over from last week. Let's see, what's the best way to give access to a paid app to select people without them paying? I'm thinking something along the lines of gift codes for testers so they don't have to pay, but still get the updates from Google Play. Well, yeah, gift codes is a cool idea. Unfortunately, we don't have gift codes at this time. But you could always make an app free to download and have some sort of server-based authentication that kind of, implement your own whitelisting and let the users unlock the functionality that way. That's kind of the best idea I can come up with. What about you other guys? Any thoughts on that? How to give free access to paid apps to selected users?
The best way is really to get them to buy an application, send you the checkout order ID and refund it. Unfortunately, it's not a great workflow, but if you want to send it out to a few reviewers or something that way, it is a way to work around it. Best I've got right now.
Okay. Next question from the moderator. Developers are asking for the best practice ways to implement list adapters. I would love to see a really good tutorial on the resources which shows the best way to do it. What would you guys recommend? So, yeah, I've been feeling that it's probably time for us to come up with a really, really good grounding in how to do list adapters, because I see this question a whole lot in Stack Overflow. There are a lot of tutorials out there. I haven't visited most of them myself. There are just too many. But my current go-to favorite is fragment layout from the Compat 4 demo, because it uses the list fragment, and it also it's super simple, and it has everything you need in one source code file, and it's compatible all the way back to Donut. So that's my go-to, but maybe you guys can offer your own favorites for what do you use for a template for a list adapter?
I use the tutorial that shows you how to use the database, a mini database inside your app. Also, it has a good.
Or like just doing a simple a list of items.
Yes, for like to show countries and stuff like that.
So that's the Hello List View, right? Hello List View tutorial?
Yes.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's in the developerandroid.com/resources tutorials section.
Yes, and it's very simple because it's the very basics, so it's very easy to understand from it how to use it.
Maybe we should post a link to that on this Hangout, if you have it handy.
I tend to just roll my own every time I write one. It's just extend based adapter, replace get view, do a little view holder pattern. Pretty simple stuff.
I tend to find a lot of the time that the ones that are included, such as resource cursor adapter, things like that, tend to cover a lot of what I need. I find it very rare that I actually need to go and roll my own. I've in times been tempted to roll my own and then had another look at what's available and found something useful there, because there seems to be an awful lot of them built into the framework.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, thanks for your suggestions. Since there's nobody else in the chat, I'll go on to the next, or in the Hangout, I'll go on to the next question and moderator. Let's see, Eric from Philadelphia says,
on the best thing to do with list adapter, really the best resource on working with lists is the Google I/O talk from 2 years ago by Romain Guy, the World of List View. I mean, that really goes through all the fundamentals of everything you need to know about working with lists. So that is your kind of go-to place, a World of List View. Sorry, Sparky, carry on.
Yeah, plus one to what Nick said. Anything that ever came from Romain Guy is worth your time. Okay, so Eric from Philly says, we are struggling to implement a gallery that looks nice on a Zyboard. We suspect it's a problem with Motorola's UI skin. It looks great on all the other tablets. Any tips on dealing with manufacturer skins? And the best answer that I can come up with is either use Holo as your theme or create your own theme but inherit from Holo, because the holographic theme is one that manufacturers are not allowed to modify, so at least you have a known starting point. It may not look as natural on, in the context of all the other applications on that particular device, which may be using, for example, the device default theme, but at least it'll look the same on every device that you're deployed on. So I guess it's sort of the question is, do you want to look like all the other apps, or do you want all of your instances to look the same? If you want everything of yours to look the same, then inherit from Holo. All right, let's go to the next question from the moderator. What is the current state and future plan for native vector graphics support as part of the Android graphics UI? Well, we don't speculate on things that haven't been announced, so I would say we have nothing to say on native vector graphics.
Good answer.
Let's see. Next question. Is it possible to build a file content provider to access files on an FTP server? I would say yes, you can build a content provider that's backed by an FTP server, but your latency would probably be pretty bad. But other than that, technically, there's no reason why you couldn't do it. So, oh, who just joined us in the Hangout? Let's see. Moshe? Moshe, hi. Welcome to the Hangout. Do you have a question about Android development?
Yes, I have. I would like to
ask
you about the...
If you're unable to speak it because you're in a quiet environment or something, feel free to type your question in the chat or in the stream.
He's talking, but it's a bit very quiet. I can hear him.
Oh, is he in your office?
No, he's a friend of mine. So.
Okay.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you now.
Yes, so I have a question about action bar. I just showed the Sherlock action bar, and I would like to add it to my project. I don't know why, but I can't. I try to add it, and it seems like. Wait, I will search for the error. And it seems to me that the minimum SDK or the target SDK, it's not compatible with this version. Can you explain me a bit about the minimum SDK and the target SDK, what their meanings?
Sure. Well, so I believe the minimum SDK for Action by Sherlock is API 7. Is that right, everyone? I think so.
Sounds right to me.
That's for the actual application itself, but if he's building Action Bar Sherlock as a separate library project, That needs to be up, I think, at 15 for that specific project. Then his main app can be at 7.
So the build version, or are you talking about the target SDK? Different things, right?
There's what you can do is you can have Action Bar Sherlock as a separate project under Eclipse, and the separate Action Bar Sherlock project needs to be 15, but the main app project can be down as low as 7. I'm not sure whether that's the way he's doing it and whether that's the problem he's encountering.
Does that make sense, Moshi?
Yeah, so I messed around with Action Bar Sherlock a little bit, and I just started by building the samples that came with Action Bar Sherlock and sort of progressed from there. I took it and sort of retroactively applied it to some of the demos from the API demos, or the compat versions of API demos, and I don't know what to say. It worked all right for me. I have those code, that source code is online. I'll share you the link as soon as I find it.
And yes, thank you very much. And I would like to say that the Eclipse doesn't recognize some of the package and the classes. You are supposed to. I just download it and import the project into my Eclipse, and it doesn't recognize a lot of the files.
What do you have as your minimum SDK or the target SDK version in the ADT drop-down?
It's a gingerbread, isn't it, Moshe?
This is what?
It's a 2.3, right? The lowest version that you use.
2.2.
2.2, okay.
If you've downloaded Action Bar Sherlock and it's that project you're having a problem with, you'll need to use 4.0.3. And you should find that will find the packages that the Action Bar Sherlock project references.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So I found my sample code. If you go to code.google.com/p/Sherlock-demo, this is a little sample that I hacked up. The thing that I thought made it worthwhile is that it uses Action Bar Sherlock together with the API demos sample that mashes up the view pager and the tabs. So this uses basically native Action Bar tabs in combination with the view pager, in combination with Action Bar Sherlock. That's in a nutshell what I posted. Basically, none of the code was written by me. I just adapted it so that it worked together. So that's codegoogle.com/p/Sherlock-demo. So we've just been joined by Abraham. Welcome.
Hi.
Do you have a question about Android development?
Yes, I do. I asked it in the moderator also, but if you can answer me here, it's great.
What was your question?
About the alert dialog. How to make a custom subclass of alert dialog that will look like alert dialog, but with custom content view.
I didn't see that one.
It's at the end of the first page, I think. It was in the morning.
Is that on the EAME moderator, or is that one of the other moderators?
Oh, sorry, I think, yeah, it was maybe on the US one.
How can I know?
If it's in the moderator that was linked from the announcement for this Hangout, that was this one.
Okay, so in any case, I will ask here.
Okay, sure.
I have a subclass of alert dialog that will show a list of the available Wi-Fi networks in range. And I want the user to pick one and then to return the result to some activity. Now, when I set either the custom view or the view itself of the alert dialog, it just replaces the whole view, and I don't get the title or the icon or the frame. So my question is, how do I get the alert dialog look with my custom content view?
So you can't just do like just a custom view for the list item itself?
No, because the alert that my subclass is also responsible for listening to the scan results of the Wi-Fi manager and updating the list as they come. So it has to be a subclass, a specific subclass of alert dialog, and this is the reason why I can't use the alert dialog builder. So I can't just give it a custom list view or something like that. It has to be my subclass.
Could this be a good opportunity to use a dialog fragment and the fragment framework?
No, I don't use dialog fragment.
Dialog activity. I'm thinking. It's. I just don't know whether the framework actually does what you need as one of its built-in widgets, or if you just need to kind of roll your own. I don't know off the top of my head. I would say if none of us knows right off the top of our head, then your best recourse is probably to post a question into Stack Overflow and let the expert community offer up their wisdom.
Already did, but I got no good answer yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you? If you can give us that Stack Overflow link, then I'll try to take a look at it in the next day or two.
Okay, I'll do that. Do you know if alert dialog even intended to be used without the builder, or can I create my own with the constructor and present it myself, or should I use only the builder?
That I don't know. I would say use the builder if you can. But again, a lot of these things are conveniences to try to optimize the common case. And if your case is a special case, then just because you can't use something like a builder doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong for you to use more direct access to more direct.
I myself, I used the alert dialog without the builder once. What I did is I created a layout in the XMLs and then used the method called setLayout, so content if I'm not mistaken, and just put in the link to the layout, and I didn't use builder to do the alert dialog.
And it looked like alert dialog?
Yes, it looked like an alert dialog. It popped up like a normal alert dialog, and then it blacked the rest of the screen like a normal alert dialog.
Okay, so if you could answer my question on Stack Overflow, that would be great.
Okay.
It sounds like you two should take it offline.
Okay. Thank you.
So who else is in the call? We've been joined by Jorge and Drew Bryce. Any questions about Android development from you two? Okay. Yeah. Drew is hard at work, he says, even though he's listening to us. Jorge, do you have a question about Android development that you'd like to ask? Nothing yet. Okay. Let's see if we have another question from the moderator. We did that one last week. Is there an easy way to test the lifecycle of a fragment, just like the activity unit test case? Well, not that I know of. But then, fragments are hosted by activities. So basically, you just have to, I think, try to reach it through the activity that owns it. Let's see. Next question. I'm finding it a bit strange that I can action send multiple images to my app, but only can action click. What's the reasoning behind not having an action click multiple? This would basically look the same as sent. And then there's some more detail about what we want to do. So, okay, enough away. So, yeah, the framework is not always perfectly orthogonal. Sometimes framework features get arise out of the needs of particular applications that are being implemented in the framework, and so the sort of API is created as needed. I don't know if that was the case here or if it's just the way it happened to be. There are some tutorials where people have done something like that. For instance, and if you go to the moderator, you can see the links. Like here's vicascani.wordpress.com/2011-720 Android custom image gallery with checkbox in a grid to select multiple. It's a awfully long URL, but if you go into the moderator, you can just click on the link. So yeah, I could put it in as a feature request. Might have done so. I don't remember. I think I did. But yeah, sometimes the framework just doesn't cover every use case. Not even always the good ones. So that's my answer to that. What do you guys think? Any thoughts from Nick or Peter? Al?
Does the action send multiple not? Can't you possibly duplicate what you're trying to do using that?
Yeah, I mean basically he's just trying to do like a multi-gallery picker, and try to send them all.
Okay, because there is an action send multiple.
Oh, sorry. Sorry. Let me disambiguate. Yes, the writer talks about how send multiple is there, and what he wants is pick multiple.
Yeah.
So it's like the reciprocal action.
Sure. I was just wondering if there's no way of managing to use the send multiple to actually get the same functionality.
Or you could just try and get some support for multiple apps to support your own pick multiple action. So if you could register the pick multiple on openintents.org or somewhere like that, and try and petition developers of other gallery such apps to support the intent, there's no reason why. I mean, obviously it'd be great if it was built in, but we can suggest it as a feature request.
It's a good answer. I like that. Open intents is cool.
Yes, there's nothing magic about the intents listed in the platform. They're just constant strings. I mean, you just need to get enough people to converge around the same actions and verbs and the same metadata types, and magic can happen.
I will concede though that I think it's pretty hard to get a lot of momentum behind a third-party intent. I mean, it's great if you can do it, and I'm all for it. But sometimes you just do need a little bit of an extra push from the application or from the framework too.
It's true, but things like Zebra Crossing have done it with this action scan, right? It's not impossible. It's just you need to be really proactive with good support, really good documentation of your intents, and try and offer some really useful functionality, and hopefully people will come.
There is always, of course, if it is a really, really useful intent, the possibility of submitting it to the Android open source project, and that way it can trickle through into future versions if it gets the right amount of backing.
That's a great answer, yeah.
Oh, excellent. Well, I see that Oren has joined us in the Hangout. Oren, do you have a question for us? Oren is typing. Okay. So while he's typing, perhaps I will go on to the next moderator question. Who would you recommend implement 9 patches in your application assets, the UI designer or the developer? Who does it at Google? Well, I would say designer all the way, because as a developer, my artistic skills suck. What do you think, Nick?
I think that's case by case. It depends how comfortable your designer is with, code concepts and so on. Hopefully they should be. I've worked on projects where the designers deliver the 9 patches, completely marked up with the stretching and scaling areas, and that's been great. And other places, designers don't really want to think about that kind of thing, and the developers have to figure it out. So I think it comes down to the case by case of your team.
Long ago, I volunteered effort in an MMO, and I would say, we had a term there. We called it programmer art. Programmer art is images that the coders hacked up just to kind of make something work until the artist could actually get to it. And sometimes programmer art actually got out into the game, and you could always tell when landscape pieces or mobs were assembled by the developers as opposed to by the artists. I developed a couple of mobs myself just using tile sprite graphics, and I thought that they looked pretty okay. And then an artist would, I'd like spend a day on it, and I thought, yeah, this is pretty all right. And then an artist would come along, and in 2 hours he'd get something that just blew away everything that I had done. So yeah, I'm a big fan of letting the artists do the art.
A lot of designers seem to like the idea that once you've taught them about 9-patch drawboards, if they're freelance designers particularly, they can then go on and say, look, I know about this stuff. You're writing an Android app. I can design it specifically for that platform. So it's a skill that designers can pick up, and sometimes it's actually worth the designer taking the time to get familiar with it.
Yeah, generally designers, if you say, if you're given the door, they'll grab these things and run with it. And as a rule, if I have a designer handy, I would hand it over to them, because after all, that's what they do. UX. That's what they're good at.
Well, we can take a look at Oren's question. He wants to know, how do I debug NDK code on Windows? I don't find any official tutorials. I don't think there are too many official tutorials on NDK. Dan Galpin gave some talks in the last year or two about NDK, and some of those covered debugging. I don't mess around much with NDK myself because I'm really sort of SDK focused, but if I recall, most of the comments revolved around attaching Windows debuggers to the C library and debugging that as a native Windows library. Basically, use Eclipse to debug the Java stuff, the Dalvik stuff, and use a Windows debugger to debug the C stuff. That was my recollection.
Yeah, I think essentially you want to be running GDB server as root on your phone, and then it's just debugging over GDB connection, as I understand it. But I think in the latest preview release of ADT 20, there's some the beginnings of NDK debug support coming, I think. So you might want to jump over to tools.android.com and read up on the latest announcements there and see what's going on there. That'll help you. I haven't really had a chance to play with it myself yet, but I think there's some support starting to come out there. And there's a link in the chat. Thank you, Al.
Awesome. Cool.
There's also a couple of questions being asked in the G+ thread, so I thought we could perhaps circle back and pick those up as well. That's cool stuff.
Yeah.
So, David Scott, who's also just joined the chat.
Hey, David.
You want to ask your question live rather than me reading it out?
I guess he's in a quiet environment.
He's typing, got no mic. Okay, let me read out what you wrote in the first post. It's a bit long. Question about screen size qualifiers. I want to be able to filter my app for devices with a certain screen resolution. I realize you can't do it for exact screen resolution. So you mean you want it to only show up for certain screen sizes? Typing.
Yeah, I would say it's not a good idea to focus on the pixel count. You really want to deal more with your physical sizes. But,
While he's typing out, I'll read the rest of his question. It says, what I want a filter for is 7-inch tablets and larger, but also for high-res phones like Galaxy Nexus, Galaxy Note. I also want it to be backwards compatible to 2.2 if possible. Any ideas of the best practice for this?
support screens?
So compatible screens is your only option at the moment. I'm extremely hesitant to recommend it because it's a pretty blunt tool. But if you look at the compatible screens element in your manifest, that lets you opt in to screen size and density combinations. So you could opt in to say, I only want my app to be available to X large screens with these densities and normal size screens only with, say, X HDPI resolution. So you can do that. Again, I'm going to warn you and say, please don't do that. Basically, you're kind of opting into certain configurations rather than opting out of ones which are known bad, which means that if any future configurations get launched, like when Google TV launched, we introduced a new TV DPI, for example, your apps wouldn't show up for anything like that sort of thing. So just be very aware of what you're doing when you use this kind of blunt instrument. But that is currently the only way you can hide your app in market from other stuff. Does that answer your question? He's nodding. Okay. You're welcome.
Well, another thing you might be able to
one
do
more.
with tablets, you can do, to say version 3 or so. If you did based on Android versions, number 3 is only for tablets. So that would cover large screens, and it's not based on screen size.
Not necessarily, because what about ice cream sandwich phones? I mean, they're going to be greater than the APK level, than the SDK level, right? And they're still going to be on smaller phones. You're going to get, the small Sony Ericsson phones and so on running ice cream sandwich.
Right, and there's nothing saying it has to. There's nothing saying it has to be SHDPI either. It could be a normal DPI, a normal size, and still be ice cream sandwich.
So, yeah.
Another question from Oren. Looking for a replacement of using Toast to perform a floating message. Let's see, don't want to use Toast because going to the home screen keeps it for a while, even if I'm dismissing it. Easy solution. Display a dialogue activity with a timeout on it.
How about a frame layout with just a text view?
Yeah, I see no reason why you couldn't just put a little timer in the alarm manager or a little thread or something to just watch the time and make it go away at the right time. All right. So we've just been joined by Yossi. Hello. Welcome to the chat. Did you want to ask us a question? Or did you have one in the moderator already?
Hi all. Not asking a question, just wanted to see how you're answering the questions already on the moderator and everything. That's it.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. Just make sure that I'm not missing anybody. Question. What is the best software tool to display the phone screen or tablet on the computer screen? I've seen some Google presentations of some phone screens on the big screen demo. Well, when you see a Google presentation, more often than not, you're probably actually seeing the hardware video out, the HDMI out, driving the display directly. But if you want to do it entirely in a software solution, in the past, we've been fans of a utility called Droid at Screen. The URL is blog.ribomation.com/droidatscreen. It's a nice, I think that's a pretty nice utility for displaying the video all in software, and it's free. So it's worth more than you pay for it.
I think another good example is with the emulator getting hardware acceleration, hardware rendering, and the HAX emulator as well, given the Intel kind of support. The emulator is getting much more performant. So if you are wanting to record videos and certain things, like the emulator is actually getting to be a viable alternative.
That's pretty cool. I remember the first time I tried to demo a honeycomb in the emulator in front of a live audience. Ouch. Yeah, I probably should have gone with a smaller than HD screen resolution, really. So yeah, Oren says he's using HDMI and HDMI recorder card. Cool, it's a good solution.
Yeah, it's really best one. I think we said this before as well. If you're using an ice cream sandwich device as well, you can go into the settings, developer options, and turn on show touches, which is a nice way to record a video showing where you are actually touching the screen.
So let's see. Next question on the moderator. What is the best way to give access? No, wait. I have that question already. Am I on the same page? No. Okay. Is there a proper way to use Search Recent Suggestions Provider with an autocomplete text view? I don't know. Anybody done Search Recent Suggestions Provider? I would say try Stack Overflow.
Yeah, I've not tried it yet, unfortunately.
It's a little bit of an obscure one. I looked into this a little bit, but didn't come up with a really good answer. So I will acknowledge the question and apologize for not having an answer for you.
And in the G+ comments, Bernie asks about any chance of making a standard component for what looks like a rotating wheel control on iOS. I would say not very big chance, no. The problem being that I think there's a tendency to not want to grow the standard control kit because of the legacy that involves, the amount of work that involves, like, you know, maintaining it forever and making sure it's backward compatible and so on and so forth. I think we've seen more of a tendency of the Envoy team to introduce new functionality into things like the support library. So things like ViewPager, for example, introducing the support library rather than the official UI toolkit. I think it's for those reasons, for not having to, you know, commit ourselves to it and maintaining it for forever and ever. So I can't see it becoming a standard toolkit. As to would we port it, like if it's pretty niche, I can't see that. But it sounds like a great community effort. Like I had a quick glance at the iOS page, and it looked like it was, you know, completely spelled out how to go about it. It sounds like a fun project to support that kind of operation to Android. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to kind of go through that, or, you know, try and get some people to help you, like starting out an open source project perhaps. So,
there is already a radial menu widget project on Google Code, which may be a great starting point, and it's going to pop a link up so that they can have a look and see whether it's enough for them to get going with.
Cool.
Cool. I like that. Speaking of radial menu, I also love the I love the hidden radial button labs feature in the browser in Honeycomb and beyond. That's my preferred UI for the browser too. Let's see. There's a question in the chat here. Drew Bryce wants to know, when dealing with PDFs, they can't be opened in-app using a browser window. Is there a particular PDF SDK we would recommend to people? Like as a compiled-in library, I don't know. I mean, there are some, but I don't have any reason to prefer one over the other. I would, you know, I think your basically your option here is to just install an app that reads PDKs and send an intent. Do any of the Google provided apps on Android read PDK?
Nothing in AOSP, but many ROMs, like, you know, from carriers come with some form of, you know, documents to open it.
Document viewer or something like that.
Yeah, I was wondering if Docs for Android does, or I don't know.
Well, it's possible to pick up how many packages can service a certain intent. So it might be worth putting into the code a check to see if there is anything that can service a view intent on a PDF, and there's nothing there. Maybe he wants to pick a favorite application from Market for viewing PDFs and pop up the recommendation that they install it from Market and send the appropriate link to the package that they want installed.
Right. In fact, there's a neat little snippet of code. I think it's in the maybe in the resources part of developerandroid.com. I think it's called "Can I Send This Intent?" that gives you the code that queries the package manager to see who can service the intent. We can look to that at some other time if we don't get it by the end of the call. Let's see. Do we have?
Does anyone know if any of the PDF apps out there do support any extras for doing things like search, showing search, highlighting search terms and so on? Has anyone got any experience there?
I think I'm using Easy PDF. I think that one has some integration with the web and sort of internal text searching and also web searching.
Cool, but do you know if you can invoke that with the like an extra when you do the view?
No, I just know that when I select a PDF file, it shows the things that can read it. Let's see. Okay, we had a question from Yair. Yair? I don't think is in the chat right now. Said, how do I get resources using the NDK? Yeah, there isn't a lot of documentation on this. There is some discussion, and if you search Stack Overflow for it, for instance, Stack Overflow questions 265-1816 or Stack Overflow questions 227-8359. There's some discussion or links to other discussions about how to get resources into your NDK code. And they basically involve hacks that let you essentially read your APK directly using the C code and extracting your resources out of it from there.
Yeah, you can just treat it as a zip file, but I think from 2.3 onwards, isn't there an official asset manager that lets you get access to the assets?
That's assets, but I think we're talking specifically about resources. There's these. I think these are different things.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But yes, getting access to your assets is another equally interesting and equally valid question. And that one is a little more officially supported. All you have to do is link to the asset manager. And there's some, I think there is some sample code in the NDK samples that shows that. So,
cool.
Yeah. Excellent. Al found the link to our question about intents and filters in the sidebar of the chat. Let's see, is nobody else in the Hangout? Nick, do you have any more questions from the Plus stream?
I'm just checking.
Okay, I'll move on with the next question.
There is one
moderator.
Which I am not answering because I don't know the answer of, but maybe you guys do. Apparently, set on utterance completed listener in the text-to-speech package has been deprecated as of API level 15. Will this break applications previously written with that method, or there'll be some backwards compatibility? I don't currently know the answer. Any of you guys use this package or know anything about it being deprecated?
Don't use it. I mean, generally, deprecation has kind of a long tail. When we deprecate something, it means we plan to drop support for it, but we don't say when. I mean, you look at, like, say, in layouts, fill parent. That's been deprecated since what, API 7, and we're still allowing you to use it. So, yeah, who's to say? I think that the framework team does their best not to drop not to drop anything that applications depend on without providing a valid, useful replacement for it. So we've just been joined by...
I've just had a quick look in the documentation. It says there's a set on utterance progress listener, which should be used instead of set on utterance completed listener.
Okay, that's a good answer.
I'll pop the link up in the Google Plus comments so that the question asker can refer to that.
And from which versions is that, which releases is that supported?
That is 15 onwards, so it looks like it's just an API rename to handle progress all the way through rather than just having a single completed listener.
Yeah. So maybe you'll need some conditional code to check what is running and call the right thing.
I wonder if this is in order to support continuous mode recognition or something like that.
Yeah, the progress one just supports three methods: on done, on error, and on start, rather than just completed. So it just seemed like a better solution. But I guess it's quite a clear switch over it, isn't it, really? So depending on, you can either wrap your code in checking the OS.build version and see which version you're running on, and invoke the right one for the platform it's running upon, like progressive enhancement. But like Sparky says, like, just because it's deprecated doesn't mean it's going to go away anytime real soon. We don't want to go and break a bunch of apps out there. So I'd say any new code you're writing, or if you get the chance to update old code, which is easy, then do. But yeah, keep an eye on it to see when it actually goes away.
So we've been joined in the Hangout by, is your name Imhotep? Is that your name? Did I get that right? Did you want to ask a question about Android development? Not saying anything. Are you muted? Well, we'll give you a minute to get sorted. Then I have a question to moderator. Is there any way to include resources in the jar of a library project? If not, does that mean that if I have custom resources, the only way I can distribute my library is by sending the whole project code? The short answer is it's not supported at this time to include resources in the jar of a library project. Sorry. I don't know what our plans would be for doing that in the future, but at least there's nothing right now. Okay. Let's take a look at another moderator question. So I have a counter which is running indefinitely on an activity. I want to get current value of the counter in each moment when I switch to another activity. How can I proceed? Well, I would say this is a great activity lifecycle question. At the time when you switch from your first activity to the second activity, your first activity is going to receive is going to have its onPause method called, and during onPause you can grab the value of that counter and put it in a shared resource, and then your next activity can read that resource and get the value from there. How does that sound to you guys?
I didn't quite understand the question now, really. Like, so they want to be able to access this counter from different activities? Or is it like,
well, that's hard to say. It says I want to get a current value of the counter in each moment when I switch to another activity. I took that as meaning at the time of the switch, but maybe you're right. Maybe he wants it always. In which case, I guess it would have to be in a service.
One possibility might be to do the counting in a service and actually let multiple activities kind of bind to the service in order to get the current one, but I didn't quite understand the question.
Okay, so two answers to the question depending on what the what the asker's intent was.
The other thing is if he's explicitly switching to the other activity, just pass the value along in the bundle.
Sure, bundle it into the intent.
Yeah.
That too. Wow, so many good ways to do it. Nick in Irvine says, I find the Eclipse logcat to be a little bit inflexible to use. For example, I can't select copy portions of a log statement line. May also find that you try to look at something while it's still scrolling and it jumps back to the bottom. He wants to know how many of you prefer to view your logcads in Eclipse versus using ADB logcat in a terminal. Well, I can answer that. I always do it in Eclipse. I try to look sharp and use. I try to use the built-in the filtering functions to filter only messages for my application.
Same here. I can never remember the CLI syntax for filtering my messages, so I always end up using Eclipse. Although there are some cool scripts out there which will give you like funky highlighting via logcat, which I've got.
I tend to go with the command line one because I tend to pipe it through other commands like grep for doing filtering, and sometimes dump it to a file as the log's being generated. So, but I've been using Unix for too long.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, Al, I expected that answer from you. You just seem like a command line sort of guy, I guess.
Oh, I come back from the days when IRIX was still a popular operating system.
Now, I dispute the claim that IRIX was ever popular.
It was amongst people who were rich enough to own SGI boxes in universities.
Yeah. No, yeah, we had some nice ones too. Yeah, right, personal iris. Yep.
Its claim to fame is it was the only version of Unix you couldn't actually find the amount of free disk space in kilobytes. It would only ever tell you in blocks.
Okay.
The other way you can do it is using the Dalvik debug monitor. That's also useful.
Okay. Let's see. Do we have any more questions from the participants in the Hangout?
So Imhotep's saying he has a problem with his microphone, but feel free to type in your question in the chat if you have one.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you want to type your question, please feel free, and I'll go ahead and while you're typing, I'll look at the next question from the moderator.
We've got time for about one more, I think.
Do you know of a way to convert a .3GP file created using Media Reporter into .wav file format? The best answer we came up with that is FFmpeg.
So you're talking about off-device?
Well, the asker didn't say, so we answered the way we felt like answering. Another question, does Android Browser WebView support HTTPS on other ports besides 443? I assume that it does. Try it out. If it doesn't, then it doesn't, but I assume it does. Okay. Does anyone have any last questions before we wrap it up for the week? I don't see typing activity. I don't know if Imhotep is going to ask us a question or not.
Okay, well, we're...
But you can always ask it in the moderator thread, and we will answer it as soon as we can, and possibly discuss it in the Hangout next week. Okay. Or you can ask your question on Stack Overflow and let us know the link to Stack Overflow, and then you will have the benefit of the entire global Android developer conspiracy lending their wisdom to your programming challenges.
Mm.